Hey guys, Steven here, Fanatic Perspective. Another day, another domino falls as the Big Ten announces they will only be playing conference games in the fall of 2020. College football takes another blow. We talked about it earlier this week with the announcement of the State Fair of Texas going down, how that impacts OU Texas. Now we're hearing out of conference games being taken away. Many folks impacted by this in various ways. We're going to break it all down. I appreciate everyone watching this video, liking, sharing, subscribing. Those of you who have been sharing across several different platforms on social media, I can't thank you enough. But hit me in the comment section with your thoughts on how administrations and NCAA are responding to this new world that we're in, middle of a global pandemic, and how they're responding. And if you think that it's a good idea to keep things going the way that they are and cutting it up and playing conference only games in the fall, possibly fanless, or if we should push it back to the spring, because that's something that we brought up here on this channel when we were talking with Tran on Tuesday about pushing games back spring 2021, actually having fans in play and having a full season. Now, there's several issues with that many of you brought up in the comments that are very, very valid, and might dive into that at the end of this video. But there's a direction that we're being taken, but it's a direction that some of the things make sense and some of the things don't. And I do think we'll see other conferences coming into play. Could this be the end of these Power 5 conferences as we know it? Because you see the Big Ten makes their announcement, but we're getting a different message from the Big 12, and we're getting a different message from the SEC. They're not in lockstep with each other. And granted, conferences are regionally based and have their own measures and whatnot, but when you even look at it from a regional standpoint in terms of COVID and conference-only games, well, and I'm going to share my screen here in a second. If you're looking at Iowa versus Iowa State, they're closer together than their conference opponents, or even a school like UTEP that, is kind of far away because El Paso coming to Austin. But in the state of Texas and the amount of money that they might lose out for a check, or, all these people that are impacted. So a lot I want to dive into because, as I said before, some of this stuff doesn't make sense. Not having a jersey swap, NFL, that doesn't make sense. If we're hitting and holding and blocking and tackling for 3-4 hours, and then all of a sudden I can get COVID if I exchange jersey, doesn't make sense. The personal aspect, before I even get to the personal aspect, I'm gonna show you guys some of these games here, because I think this is indicative of what I'm talking about from a standpoint of people that are going to be impacted by this. So we look at Michigan, Washington, huge game. Ohio State at Oregon, huge game. I mentioned Iowa State, Iowa. But even a school like Appalachian State going to Wisconsin, that's a good check. Cincinnati at Nebraska, Miami at Michigan State. These are enormous games. What the hell is Notre Dame going to do? I just saw that the ACC mentioned, I think it was a few hours ago, that they would try to, because I believe the ACC will also go to conference-only games, and I've heard that the schools in the conference are going to try to help Notre Dame out as much as possible. Obviously, Notre Dame is a member of the conference in some sports, but on football, so it's a very, very complicated situation. And then you look at what the Big Ten does, because the Big Ten does a lot of business with Notre Dame. So they're kind of just out there, in limbo, like John Travolta's character in Pulp Fiction. It's kind of hilarious to think about from that standpoint. But it sucks if you're a Notre Dame fan, if you're a fan of, that's what I was going to get to with the personal aspect. If this was a bucket list trip to go to Lambeau Field, because it is on my bucket list, to go see a football game at Lambeau Field, and it's Wisconsin Notre Dame. It's a really, really cool game in the fall. Perfect football weather. Can't go wrong here, right? This is taken away, right? Now, it being taken away, let me stop there. I am all for safety. I'm all for, mask and the precautions and doing everything we need to do as a society to get to a point where we can enjoy things like football, things like, all the other sports, especially in person. But we, the way we've acted and the way we've kind of handled this thing, we've botched it badly. So now we have to do what's in the best interest of the staffs, the players, everyone involved, because I think well, not a lot, but some fans are being somewhat selfish and just trying to throw folks out there like they're a piece of meat or a product. And the game itself is a product, but the players are people and the coaches are people, and everyone that's involved is dealing with this. I've had family members on all my mother's side, my father's side, my wife's mother's side, my wife's father's side, all get impacted with this pandemic. Some have had very, very bad symptoms and struggled and been hospitalized, and some have been asymptomatic and okay. So we have to just take a deep breath and kind of slow down and be practical here of how we're looking at this from the long term. Even look at the Ivy League here. Look at this note that they have here on ESPN. Ivy League on Wednesday ruled out playing all sports this fall. It's crazy. I mean, and this is just what's here on the ESPN website. I'll get to the Texas schedule here in a second. But, guys, I mean, when we look at where we're headed, it's all driven by revenue. And I understand the revenue lost from out of conference perspective. But if you're a school like Alabama or many of the schools in the SEC, they survive on their football revenue, period. And, enrollment, the appeal for these programs, the appeal to go to these schools, football is really what they have. So I think that's something that is being brought to the line, being exposed in a lot of ways. And even from the standpoint of like, we can't even wait till the spring. And then we get to even programs like Stanford out in the Pac-12, who 11 out of 36 varsity programs cut. It's just the impact of all this is enormous. And it's one thing in these pro leagues where you can either put teams in a bubble or have the facilities and everything in place to make sure that safe handling is in measure, protocols in measure, and even they're struggling with that. Whether it's baseball or basketball, where you're seeing the food and all the nonsense going on as players are arriving to the bubble in Orlando. This is very, very real stuff. And as it relates to college football, I'm also curious to see this. I mentioned earlier, is this the end of the Power 5 conferences? Because if they're not in lockstep and some people play and some people don't, what are the long-term ramifications of that? And do we ultimately move to where we complete and total realignment across all of college football, across all of college sports? Or do we go to more of a 4 super conferences model that I've seen? Because right now you have a 14 playoff with five Power 5 conferences, and then you also have the group of 5. Like it's just, it doesn't even, the way it's current, the structure in the system, if there's ever a time for it to be tinkered with or the system to come down from a college football perspective, it's now, as they're already in flux and being exposed in several different areas. When we look at the teams themselves, what are teams like Texas A&M going to do when they can't play the 4 or 5 cupcakes they have on their schedule? And I know those kids played a ridiculous schedule last year, but kind of sucks for them because 2020 was supposed to be, we're about to go 10-0, start the season 10-0 before we get to our tough games. And now it's like, if it's only SEC games, there's nowhere to hide. For many of you in that conference, all of you that are accustomed to winning 7-8 games and getting to a decent bowl, good luck. As it relates to Texas, shoot, let's bring up the Texas schedule. Are we going to start our season at Kansas State now? I mean, this is an interesting discussion because we're going to get big. This right here is the biggest thing that everyone's going to be worried about. Is this game going to be played? And if so, will there be fans? that when I talked about bucket list and personal impact, that's something that personally impacts me and many Texas fans who wanted nothing more than to go to the Baton Rouge experience and tailgate and do a whole trip of it, right? And immerse ourselves. And I've heard nothing but great stories about how they, get down for it and then have a night game at Death Valley with our football team, stormtrooper uniforms out there. Do we get stripped of this because we don't want to push till spring? I don't know. But on the flip side, some may say, well, Steve, we push to spring. We don't have NFL. All the NFL guys would leave, like Jamar Chase and Ellinger and anybody and Joseph Osai and Sam Acosta. All these people would declare for the draft because if the NFL is still going and they're not in lockstep with college football, what happens? So I mentioned earlier, like Kansas State, do we start in Manhattan? And in this model, people are talking about doing a home and home in Oklahoma, but I wouldn't really be down for that personally. For the tradition standpoint, I mean, if anything, move it to Jerry World, I think you still keep that neutral site aspect. Doing a home and home right now, that means if everything's cool next year, we don't get our normal traditional game because they would have to play in Austin. But we would then have only 4 home games. Either way, we'd only have 4 home games in this model. We'd have 4 home games and 5 away games instead of 4 home games, 4 away games, and 1 neutral site game. If we were to do it, move this from the Cotton Bowl to Jerry World. So very, very interesting as we break this down. I believe Oklahoma had an out of conference game with Tennessee. So there's a lot of financial and just big game ramifications of all of this. And I'm so curious to see what the college football world looks like at the conclusion of all of this, because I do think it's a time to have real conversations about conference realignment, especially if football gets canceled. And one thing that, I didn't even highlight there on the Texas schedule is, are they just trying to buy themselves more time by going to conference only? And do we still get our normal, are we still going to have our normal playoff model? And how does that work? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions and concerns there as well. So I am very, very worried about the model that they're going down. I'm okay with postponing, but there has to be a set plan across all of college football. You can't have, these conferences over here going rogue and doing their own thing. And but then again, it could be a breakdown of the entire model itself. Like I said before, y'all hit me in the comments. Let me know what you think of all this. It's madness. I'm still trying to, as you can see on this video, trying to process everything and trying to make it make sense in my own head. But there's so much to consider financially, from a safety perspective, and making sure kids are comfortable. Whether we'll even be reopening schools is a part of this conversation. And the selfish aspect of myself and the rest of the fans that want to see sports and feel like in this world we're going into an election season where sports is a very, very necessary distraction right now. Or do we continue in the year of being exposed of 2020 and more mass chaos? Y'all let me know what you think. I appreciate everyone that watched this video. For my Horns fans, y'all remember, Horns always up. Appreciate y'all.